Hi, it's Chicken here, Gareth the Chicken and I just thought I'd do a mini book blog on books that I think are recommendable on world building I found fascinating. Either the start of a series or standalone. So obviously the first one is Thread That Binds, a fantasy romance inspired by Greek mythology. So for this, what I found fascinating world building wise was the way soulmates were portrayed. It was something I hadn't really seen before, and I usually read paranormal romance where that topic comes up, as it was very different to my usual shapeshifter romances. And so what I find was the variety of powers and the way the city was described and the very fascinating climate that was interesting about the world building. Then, of course, there is the Girls of Paper and Fire. This is the first in a trilogy and it is excellent. What stands out in the first one is probably, for me, the description of the costumes and the luxury, as it is about two young girls, Lee, who basically is one class of people, and the emperor, the king, basically took away and put him in her fantasy harem, and she was there with 8 other girls. She falls in love with a fellow concubine. So what I found really fascinating about the world building was the caste system within the book, the description of the clothing, as I've said, and the way they rebel against the king and murder him, and the use of weaponry and poisons. Of course, so that's what I'd recommend on that. Then, of course, there is the Bells. This is the first in, I think it's a duology. I apologise for the poor copy. So with this, what I find interesting was the portrayal of beauty and how the main character had the ability to change the beauty of anyone she touches, and how, as she is essentially a belle. And obviously the sheer descriptions of the people involved and how they were guarded and essentially sort of both in a gilded cage, awkwardly, and it looks at the obsession. Then, of course, there is Cinderella is Dead. This is a standalone. I have one of her other books, which I need to read. So what I found really interesting about this was how the Cinderella fairy tale, it's the generational effect that having a brilliant, beautiful day, shining day where you're supposedly meeting the man you love, and I think the way it is interesting was really interesting and really well done. And obviously the look at how women would have to intermingle, more specifically black women, as I don't think, obviously the portrayal of lesbianism. Then, of course, there's the Boneless Mercies. One thing I will note, though, there is a massive trigger warning for assisted suicide. Awkwardly, so this one is fairly interesting, because Boneless Mercies are... What's interesting is how the portrayal of gender and the portrayal of killing is really very interesting, because they essentially just go around doing it. They're not well liked, but they're not sort of part of society. So, yeah. That was interesting, and also the monsters as well. That was quite interesting. Then, of course, there is Gods of Shadow and Bone. This is a standalone, and I think... Well, it was in the teen section of my local library, so I'm assuming it's YA. So what's incredibly interesting is the portrayal of the indigenous Maya deities. And what's particularly interesting of the very places they visit, and that was interesting. It was really good historical fantasy. I will note I don't really know that much. So yes, obviously, and the ending and the way power is and death was really interesting. Then, of course, there is the Wolf Brothers series. So this is actually one of my favourite all-time book series, although as an adult there are things that I'm reflecting on that whilst I would very much recommend it, I would note that Michelle Paver is a white Canadian. Is it American? The only reason I bring that up is because it is very much about prehistoric Sweden? No. Hang on, actually, let me